Welcome back, everyone. So this video is sort of returning to the LDOE doc 1 year later. If you remember, I made a video about the history of Last Day on Earth, and funny enough, that video is a year old. But what I wanted to do is go back to it and see what has changed, because in that video, there was a lot of talk about the future, there was a lot of talk about applying the past to the present and stuff like that. But how has that all held up 1 year later? Is all of the stuff I said absolutely thrown out, or does that stuff still hold up today? Well, I think it still holds up today, but obviously you already know my opinion on all this stuff. So maybe just for fun, I decided to bring in the LDOE admins. Yes, Leo and Kitty are back, and we're going to, I guess, talk about returning to the LDOE doc 1 year later. Yes, I know this conversation kind of pivots a little bit. Still think it has a ton of merit, and yeah, definitely an interesting discussion. Some people I talked to, they really seem to enjoy the last one. So here we are again, returning to the LDOE doc 1 year later. Again, just opinions. Subscribe. If you want to see more of this, though, let me know. Some of the stuff I mentioned in the doc, like, or I guess if you want to respond to like something JCF or Star said, you can do that too. But it's more like revisiting that 1 year later. Does the stuff still hold up to today's version of LDOE? Did it continue down the season path and regress, or did it, start to fix those mistakes? I released that doc right before Season 9, so right before the counterfoil and the multiplayer stuff all hit.
Kind of a huge change, yeah.
Yeah, so time frame wise, a little bit different, but I kind of just told you like the premise of the video and kind of just dropped it there.
I think it's
like
it's never like a clear black and white answer, right? Because it's always a subjective opinion with those type of questions. Do I think that many of the things that you guys spoke about, did they come true? Yes. I also think that a lot of things that were mentioned did not happen, right? I think that LDOE, believe it or not, is actually growing. I don't think from statistics and from the numbers, and yeah, there's not as much vocalization, but I do assure you, like, a lot of people do still play, and then there are a lot of new players as markets in Asia, the Middle East, and these other areas are finally getting a lot more access to internet. Like, for example, India, man. India in the last 2-3 years has finally had widespread access to internet. I'm talking like rural areas of India. I think that it's growing in those type of regards, right?
And you see that on our server. You see people showing up in the English only and in the Hindi chat saying like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from here. Oh, wow. Like you literally see it in real time, how the world is evolving and reflecting on the server.
Yeah. Do you think that's because of COVID, or do you think it's just LDOE in general?
I think it's LDOE, but I think that COVID expedited it. I think COVID kind of hit the fast forward button on it, because it put us into this special situation where, everyone was at home. So people who may have eventually found this game found it a lot sooner.
And in its core, LDOE is largely acultural. Sure, there's, Chinese New Year events and things like that, but you've got bears and turkeys. We're very careful not to establish a country or culture in game beyond a sort of vague.
I think it's based out of the Northeast, because of the fact that there is a northern snowy zone. There's oak tree areas, and then
there's oak and turkey and foxes, and I think that's true ecologically in game. We're pretty careful not to go too far down that road.
Yeah.
Intentionally. And so I think people can identify with what goes on there in a sort of generic way. Initially, I was frustrated with LDOE because they didn't do that kind of world building that you get in other games. And now I feel like that's something that I misjudged, because they left it a blank template enough that we could sort of imbue it with its own LDOE-ness. And now they're adding story, Genesis and things like that. But those things are loose enough that they can happen in the universe we've already built.
Definitely something I would bring up for the video. I don't know if you want to respond or whatever. I definitely think they, like, as Starsnipe brought up, they did hit the permanent content stuff on the head. I will say that, like, some season stuff is still a problem. Like 15, I'm anticipating everything's just going to disappear, because it doesn't make sense to have your anniversary event still going on in December. I think largely they they have improved on the permanent content stuff. Like right after I released this, there's the counterfoil update with, you know, shops and all of that multiplayer stuff.
Yeah, I think they've kind of figured out a better balance between the temporary content season stuff that just comes and goes. And I think they kind of had some growing pains in that, kind of in the seasons running up to 9. And like you get a little bit with the addition of Bunker Bravo and the ATV, but because that was such a long slog, it didn't pay off right away. So people didn't feel that as permanent content yet.
A lot of people weren't able to access it yet.
Yeah, a lot of people couldn't. They didn't have the mods for the weapons, and they had kind of adjusted the stuff at PD. It slowed down your ability to even get to Bravo. So I think they were trying and feeling out how to do that permanent and temporary content balance, and they didn't hit that yet with the ATV and Bravo. But then as they hit season 9 and onward, they started, I think, fine-tuning that in a way that you could have the temporary content for the fans, like Lou was saying, that this game draws so many people and they all find something in their, to their taste, to their personality in it, that you've got even now the seasons and the temporary content for the people who are driven by that. But you've also got the integration of the more long-term permanent that A, you can enjoy right away, like the port and the sewers, but B, also for the long-term grinders, like the boat and Dead Island. So I think they are finally just now finding their balance and realizing, I think maybe they lacked the confidence at first, that they could satisfy all those players at the same time.
Ultimately, Kafir is in a weird position. What they've done so far that originally were, so this is how I would kind of explain why, as time progresses and seasons continue and they change, why people are becoming more restless and not liking a lot of the seasons that have been coming out, right? It's because in the beginning, Kafir wasn't offering very much, right? And as they started seasons, you'll notice the earlier seasons, there were, for the most part, I mean, were really popular. I mean, just because up until then, up until then, there was only Bunker Bravo. There was very few things to do in the game. So I think originally the acceptance of seasons and the acceptance of a lot of these, you know, temporary type of events, it was more because people were just happy to have extra additional things to do. I don't think it was because they specifically liked those. I think ultimately it boiled down to, in the beginning, Kafir was offering things and people didn't know what they wanted yet, right? Yet, that's the key word here. What eventually happened is, as they started giving more and more seasons, people started having, you know, these feelings and ideas of what they preferred. Right. So there was an interest that started developing in terms of what people were more interested in, because now they had experience with these different options that had been offered. It's like someone trying food for the first time and, you know, they found something they really like. Well, in the future, they're going to want more of that. Right. And the problem is it's so different for everyone that ultimately, you know, when Kafir keeps trying to do this vanilla we're for everyone kind of thing, now people are like,
heck,
I've had macaroni and cheese, you know, I don't want your toast. Like, let's go back to mac and cheese, whatever their mac and cheese is. So I think that's the big issue right now with a lot of the seasons is, especially when they drop things like Crater and multiplayer in general. Multiplayer was such a huge turn in terms of a difference of how the game was played, right? It's almost an essentially different game because you literally have to change to a different character to even play it. And now multiplayer has its massive fan base, and these are people that do not even, you know, play single player. Right. And then there's people who go back and forth, and there's obviously the loners, like we talked about, the ones who just want to be by themselves.
The people in chat being like, multiplayer is the game, the single player is just, you know, there. And then you have the people on the other side that are like, single player is life, fool. That you have this kind of passion about one or the other.
As Kafir, you know, gave us more and more different options and more different things to sample, I think in a weird way they kind of they shot themselves in the foot, because now they've given us an idea of what they're capable of, and they've also given us a chance to develop our taste in what we like.
Yeah.
Right? So as you see more and more people like a certain type of thing that they produce, anytime they do not produce that in an update, all of a sudden it goes back to that whole thing of I prefer mac and cheese. And so we've essentially become picky eaters. And a lot of people don't actually even realize. I feel like no one's probably looked at it like that. They're just like, oh, well, Kafir is doing something wrong, and it's not that. It's not they're doing anything wrong. It's just their strategy, which was really effective in the beginning, right? It had to pivot along with, once they started getting feedback and players started getting experience and started voicing more of the things that they really liked from a unanimous standpoint. That's where Kafir as a company should have taken that turn, and they should have adjusted their course and said, okay, we can continue doing these unique events and sampling things for people, but these are specific elements in every single update we've noticed that people really, really like. And I think that we need to incorporate these into future, updates, so that at the minimum, people are at least interested in an aspect or a portion of an update, right? And you'll see this over time with specifically like the infinity boxes, right? Because originally the seasons were so different. Like at the end of the season, you
non-friendly word
done. Like there was nothing else. All right, good game. Go like be in real world now, up until the next season. But now, when they found out that people love these infinity boxes, and there's a way to continue milking people. I hate saying milking, but Kafir's a business at the end of the day. They have bills to pay. Like I get it, and I respect it. Kafir is one of the few games where all in all, as a free player, there is not much that you are restricted from except for pace. Right? Most of the purchases are either going to be cosmetic, specifically like skins, or it's going to come down to increasing the pace at which you can acquire or do things. That's really what it boils down to. And Kafir's been really good about that.
Agreed.
But in terms of, the things that were spoken about a year later, versus the things that were originally predicted, I think the main reason why people continue playing and why, especially for newer players, this is still such a great game is because they haven't experienced that, that jadedness of becoming familiar with the game. People who've played this game for 3-4 years at this point, they've sampled a lot of the dishes they put out, and they have their favorites. And then the new players, they don't have a favorite yet, so they are still sampling, right? And once they develop a favorite, they're going to become just like those old players who are sticking around for that 1 or 2 update, every few months, where they get exactly what they want. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see Kafir in terms of what direction they take as a company, not even as a as the game, but as a company. Do they become the company that continues trying to be a sample platter,
but also LDOE, Cyberica, Frostborn, Grimsoul. So
and that's
those levels.
That's the other thing with Kafir also, just from a standpoint of a company, is instead of focusing on one thing and doing it really, really well, they've started this jack of all trades, master of none strategy, where they're trying to essentially expand and conquer, but they're doing it at a much faster pace than they should, because they're just inundating the market with all these games that are essentially just replicated versions of each other. And what they'll do is they'll test out one aspect, and you remember, like when we tested Frostborn as the official, the staff for official server, like 2 years, we were like the first testers for the entire game. I mean, like before anyone even knew it existed, they came to staff first, and they're like, hey, can you guys check this out? I played it for all of 20 minutes. I was like, nah, this is
frigging
LDOE, except with Nordic
stuff.
Like that's, like they literally just incorporated the same mechanics, and they just replicated it with different skins.
And their concept down the road was, this is going to be multiplayer, because back then they really hadn't built out the LDOE multiplayer at all. So it was like them initially going, this is how we're going to do it, but they hadn't actually decided how they were going to do it, or what direction. They were just like, we're going to throw this pasta against the wall. And all of us who had been in LDOE were like, yeah, ours is better, so
The good news, though, is I think LDOE is the flagship. And the reason I say that, and the proof, or my proof for why I say that, is because a lot of the concepts and things that they've tested in other games, they perfected in other games before incorporating them into LDOE, which typically seems, so anyone who's done development, or anyone who's, kind of just from even a logical standpoint, you don't try or test things on your main dish, right? Like, you do that in your side dishes, dude, I love food. And that's, I'm over here like talking about food, my mouth's salivating. I mean, the analogies are getting weird, so bear with me. But like, you don't test things. You don't test a new
recipe on Thanksgiving Day. You do it the day before.
And then I guess I'll conclude off this video with this final question. I guess it's sort of the same question from the doc itself. Do you see like them going season 24, season 69, stuff like that? Do you see that continuing, or do you think they're going to immediately pivot to something else with like the sampling stuff and all that?
I don't think it's going to be an immediate thing. I do think it's going to change eventually. And the reason I say that is because every single thing they've done so far has changed. LDOE started out essentially as a permanent location-only farming game, right? You're surviving in single player, and then they started introducing these large pivots with seasons, and then with multiplayer, and then multiplayer seasons, like combinations of things. And so I think that ultimately it's gonna pivot from seasons to whatever some amazing, phenomenal thing they create that gets this positive feedback is. I think that's what's going to ultimately happen. But I do think that they are going to expand a lot more on multiplayer, just because they have realized there's such potential there. The social aspect of the game was something that I don't think they really planned out in the beginning. Just from a developer standpoint, I don't think they had any clue what they were doing with multiplayer in the beginning. They just knew they wanted to have it, right? It's like a guy who wants to buy a car, but they don't know if they want this kind of color. Like, it's just, they just know they want a car because, it's what they want, but they just don't know the
frigging
details. And I think that right now they're starting to realize kind of the various details of where they want to head, especially with multiplayer, especially with Crater.
And I feel like the community played a big role in them realizing that. Like, a lot of their early crypticness, I think, led the community to kind of pull together and be like, okay, so what does this mean? Do you know where to find the gas tank? Is it even in the game? Because they were like, you'll see in the Q&A. And so people started pulling together and leaning on each other before there was a multiplayer in-game. And so then you got the wiki and the Reddit and then Discord and the communities around the various YouTubers all leaning on each other going, they're so damn cryptic. And where is this going? And I don't know, but let's figure it out together. And I think that evolved in, well, the real world, the digital community, and then naturally began to immigrate into the game as the game added the capacity for multiplayer.
I think Kafir was just that company that had no clue what it was doing. It was just as confused as the community, and then they're like, oh,
stuff,
this works, let's keep going in that direction.
I think that's probably true, that they were like,
they just headed down the path of least resistance, and whatever worked and whatever made sense economically from a business decision standpoint, and then also from a time frame standpoint. I think it really just, I don't think there's some big conspiracy of direction, or I don't, I think honestly, Kafir is just as clueless about where they want to go in the future as we are, and I think a lot of the reasons why they are so cryptic is because they have no clue, and we've seen it in the past, when they have given solid answers on things and then they decide to change it. So we as a community are the reason Kafir now has this policy of hidden information. Think about when they used to give the date for the update. They give us a hard date in the beginning, and then I think once or twice they missed it by like a day or two. People would freak out and be like, oh my god, like what am I gonna do? And it's like, all right, first off, calm down. Calm down, big boy, just go do something for like a day. But they cried so much about a day or two that Kafir was just like, we're not going to deal with this. We're going to just give open-ended updates, and I think that's also kind of translated into the leaks and the future information, right? Like they gave us, remember a long time ago, they gave us like that roadmap, and then now they haven't even fudged on the roadmap. Because if you look at the roadmap and you look at what they've actually been doing, they don't match up. So Kafir does not want people to look at the roadmap or remind them of the roadmap, because then, you know, the same people who cried about the update being out an hour late, you know, they're going to be like, oh, well, they're not going to, it's like, well, dude, like, first off, that was like a rough estimate. Like, I'll be the first one to tell you, in any form of development, 99% of what you think you're going to do is going to turn into some other because it's what you can do. So I get it. How many times
do you see people showing up and going, Clan Wars? When?
It'll be interesting. I mean, that's a hard question to ask in terms of what they do. I can tell you, though, from their, I think 3.5 years, 4 years of their game being out, it is safe to say that it's absolutely going to change, because seasons were not a thing in the beginning. It was permanent and temporary locations. Then it was these little mini events, and then it became full-blown seasons, undoubtedly, because, other games were doing these seasons, and now you see seasons freaking everywhere. Right? And then as soon as like another game like Clash Royale does some other crazy new thing, like Kafir is going to be like, oh,
heck,
try that too. And, they're just throwing spaghetti on the wall at this point, and I feel that's not a bad thing, right? No. We're still getting to sample things. But it would be nice, and I think the community as a whole would love to see more structure and commitment from Kafir in terms of saying this is what we're going to do, or this is where we're heading. But at the same time, the reason we don't is our own fault as a community, right? Because we are the ones who also scared them away from committing because of the fact that we overreact when they are an hour late. So
I think it's true.
It's a weird, it's a weird dynamic. Yeah, it's a D word.
Anywho, I think this is probably where I conclude off this video, because I got to trim 2 hours down into who knows what.